Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis. Welcome to this DCTV series on the network of global corporate control. People have been raising questions about all the jargon, and they're asking me to keep things simple. So the only technical words I'm going to use today are the network of global corporate control. That's the name of a group of companies that thinks they rule the world, but they don't. Today's show will deal with the District of Columbia, Maryland, and the military. First, I'll give you a little bit of background. I'm a whistleblower who reported corruption at the World Bank. I worked in the legal department for 21 years. It took me 5 interviews to get a job offer at the World Bank. People who know me know that I'm not a quitter. It was not an accident I ended up at the World Bank. During the Vietnam War, when they said, "Love it or leave it," I was so angry about all the killing that I left the United States and went to Holland. I studied economics in Holland and law in the United States. If you want to help poor people and end world hunger, it's the World Bank where you try to get a job. It took me a while to find out that the World Bank on paper and the World Bank in reality were very different. I have been trying to do something about this problem ever since. This series has been coming to you weekly from DCTV for 10 months, and I'd like to thank Carmen Stanley, who's working on the production, and also Mark Wesley, who's here as the studio director. And I'd like to thank Mo Jackson, who's working on the audio and the teleprompter. The shows are archived, and you can see from the comments section that many people are learning about the way things really are in the international financial system. There's a lot of hidden corruption. We have all been comparing notes, putting this big jigsaw puzzle together. Some people are getting impatient because it's taking a while to exchange the unconstitutional currency in the United States, and they want to know why we don't just get on with the global currency reset. I'm very sympathetic to that point of view. As you learned from last week's program, there have been a lot of attempts to steal the world's gold. So far, we've succeeded in fighting off those attempts. The United States Department of Defense has an accurate model which is giving us 90 to 95% likelihood of succeeding. This model predicted that the United States was going to lose the right to simply name the president of the World Bank, and it also predicted that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa would form the BRICS. The model is saying that the United States is going to kick the Federal Reserve Bank out. The Fed is part of the network of global corporate control. I'm using the social media to get the word out. Usually, before preparing for these shows, I like to see which tweets are the most popular. The all-time most popular tweet was, and I'm showing you this on the screen, and I can't see from this what it said on that tweet. It was, "We are now in the global currency reset," and that's actually correct. What is the global currency reset? It's replacing paper currency for gold currency, called Aurum, and local currency that you are going to introduce in all your villages and towns. The gold is coming from the Global Debt Facility. I'm the Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility. The 188 Ministers of Finance on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF made me the Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility because of my whistleblowing. I've been blowing the whistle on the corruption in the international financial system without stop for many years. I've been using the Department of Defense power transition model to build coalitions along the way. The Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF is in charge of the Global Debt Facility. It's the Joint Japan-U.S. Committee under the Status of Forces Agreement that is now in charge of the military in the United States. Who is we? Turn off your TV, stop reading your newspapers, and realize that at least 80% of what you're reading on the internet is just as false as the counterfeit paper currency that is getting replaced in the global currency reset. Get yourself into small groups of friends to sort through all the corruption. And above all, be calm and happy as we work together, and realize that this chance to clean things up is a very special opportunity. It's not a once-in-a-lifetime or even once-in-an ice age opportunity. It has never happened before. We have this opportunity because of Jose Rizal, who gave us this proclamation and declaration of the gift of love. Our chances of accomplishing this are 90%. It is happening with love. The we also includes you. That's because humanity is one. This may be confusing to you. You can learn from comments and questions on my YouTube channel or send me an email. I answer all of my emails. But don't think I'm your pen pal. You have to do some reading and study yourself, or you're going to be wasting both of our time. I've been blowing the whistle for many years with the District of Columbia. This corruption goes very, very deep. The District of Columbia was created to be a booby trap for the whole United States. The mayor of the District of Columbia is supposed to be the military commander for the people of the District of Columbia, because the United States was really under martial law. The Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank has ended the martial law in the United States. The United States is now in interregnum, which is to say that Mayor Muriel Bowser is not in charge of the District of Columbia under a military rule in the United States. It's the Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and the IMF that's now in charge until the Constitution of 1789 is put back into effect via an Article 5 convention. Here's how I gave the message to Mayor Bowser. I tweeted this, by the way. You can see, as much as anyone else, exactly what I said to Mayor Bowser. I left word for Mayor Bowser at the meeting on February 29th, where I spoke with Beverly Perry, Jason Yuckenberg, and Tommy Jones about the corrupt business environment in the District of Columbia and hidden martial law. The District of Columbia's police force may not prevent me from returning to my job as Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility and Acting General Counsel of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. There is no valid barring notice because none of the corrupt officials in the World Bank or in Allied Barton have any authority to commit the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF, which I represent. I also represent the voice and vote of the United States on the Board of Governors and Boards of Executive Directors of the World Bank and IMF, because the United States is in interregnum. And as far as the state of Maryland, the state legislatures have been captured by the network of global corporate control through a Metro 1313 process that created corrupt structures above the state legislatures. I found this out when I went to a conference of state legislators held by the National Conference of State Legislators. As a matter of fact, most of the non-governmental organizations are corrupted, including the League of Women Voters, the American Association of Retired Persons, the American Civil Liberties Union, the unions, you name it. One of the most dangerous corrupt organizations is the Convention of States. That corrupt group is trying to grab control over the process of returning to a constitutional government in the United States. You're going to have to work through trusted friends and relatives and clean things out from the bottom up. Believe me. It's an aha moment when you realize how hard it's been for people to try and be honest. Don't harm anybody in the global currency reset. We're all in this together. And once you realize this, please reach out and help the people you know to get in touch with our reality. It's a wonderful new reality that we're in the process of inheriting from Jose Rizal. How did Jose Rizal manage to gain control of the world's wealth and set it aside for us to inherit now? We're only starting to scratch the surface of this wonderful story. This week, Marc Corman, the representative for District 16 in Maryland's House of Delegates, sent me this letter. Dear Ms. Hudes, thank you for writing about the ability of state legislatures to call for a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution under Article 5 of the Constitution. As you may be aware, and now the teleprompter has cut out, so let's see if I can find where I am. As you may be aware, Maryland has 4 outstanding calls for such conventions. Delegate McCongley has introduced a resolution to call for a convention as you have described. It's HJ3, which was heard in the Rules Committee on February 29th. I do not serve on the Rules Committee, but if the resolution advances to the House floor, I will keep your thoughts in mind. And here is the email that I sent to Marc Corman that he was responding to. I had sent it 2 years earlier. It was on the 20th of March, 2014. Dear Marc Corman, thank you for taking my call. Per our conversation, here's my question at General Dempsey's second town hall meeting on March 14, 2014. And you'll see in the link to the teleprompter that Veterans Today removed their article, but I've saved my letter to the editor of Veterans Today, which you can read. And here's the video interview with Professor Antal Fekete concerning the risk of permanent gold backwardation. And gold backwardation, that means that the paper currencies crash. People who hold gold will not sell it for any price. We have been in gold backwardation since July 2013. We are on the verge of permanent gold backwardation. There's not so much time remaining for paper currencies crash. I'm hoping that the fact that people know that we are going to be replacing these currencies with Aurum is going to mean that they do not crash. We're going to be in a pretty tight corner if they do, however. That's why it's important to try to get the exchange of the currencies from the banks in the Bank for International Settlements with currencies from the national treasuries. I'm going to be talking next week about my discussions with Switzerland. The Union Bank of Switzerland has uncut treasury dollars, which Ronald Reagan printed up. And Ronald Reagan, you know, was shot, and that's when he abandoned that scheme. What happened was he was driven around town, and they refused to take him to the hospital until he agreed that he would not issue the treasury dollars. What happens when you have treasury dollars is you don't have to pay interest on country debt, because the difference between what it costs to print the currency and the face amount of the bill, that remains with the U.S. Treasury. Whereas when the Fed issues it, they get to keep that difference, and then they charge us interest on country debt as well. And if you don't pay back the country debt, then you're also paying interest on the compounded country debt, which continues to grow. It's a terrible scam. And that is now ending. When people want to know what the global currency reset is about, it's about ending that scam, which has been oppressing all of the people all over this planet. And what I've finished up with in my letter to Marc Corman was a reference to the power transition model, which came from the Department of Defense. It has been tracking like clockwork, and the likelihood that what it predicts is it predicts what the coalitions are that will form, and the coalition that is now taking over control from the network of global corporate control That is the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's the G77, which is 134 developing countries. Probably the reason that I was hired into the World Bank is because I wrote a legislative history of the group of 77 between my second and third years of law school at Yale Law School. And people figured that I was committed to that coalition, which I have been working with for all of these years. I didn't realize that we were going to be bringing the gold out of the global debt facility. I didn't realize when I was assigned to the Philippines why I was assigned to that country. I was actually quite angry. I wanted to stay working on the Middle East because I knew that that was a huge problem. And when Jacek Kugler, who developed the power transition model for the Department of Defense, came to the World Bank, he told me we had 5 years to prevent a nuclear war in the Middle East. That's Syria that we're dealing with, and so far we have prevented that nuclear war. And let me just finish up with my email to Marc Corman. It will be an interesting election in June if we make it, and this was written in 2014. State legislatures have the return of rule of law in front of them in the context of the Article 5 Constitutional Convention. And then I got an email response back from Marc Corman on the 20th of March 2014. Thanks, Karen. Best, Mark. So Mark kept that email, and he responded to it 2 years later. And this lets us know that some of the people in the state legislatures understand that their job is to take us out of this secret military rule, which we have not consented to. And that's why we are no longer agreeing that we should be ruled secretly by General Dunford. General Dunford had one of his henchmen call me up and threaten me. I told that person that I didn't intimidate and that the one who was taking orders was General Dunford, and that General Dunford was taking orders from the network of global corporate control. And that is the way it is, General Dunford. Do you hear me? Let's talk about the U.S. military. I've been writing to the U.S. military and in touch with them for many years. I reminded them that the gold that is available to the United States in the global debt facility was necessary to prevent a unilateral surrender because of the weakness of that unconstitutional paper currency scam that we call Federal Reserve notes. When the U.S. military started trying to scare people by firing ICBMs along the coastlines, here is what I posted on Zero Hedge. The U.S. Armed Services, which includes the Joint Japan-U.S. Committee under the Status of Forces Agreement, is able to return to the rule of law and ignore the treasonous network of global corporate control's lackeys. These traitors are all bankrupt and are losing their houses. Meanwhile, the social media keeps everyone informed of the real insolvency and impotence of these corrupt people. Let me read to you from a letter which I forwarded to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've been disclosing the corruption of the United States Federal Reserve to the United States Congress for many years. The Federal Reserve System and the U.S. Treasury do not have title to the United States gold reserves. We are now at a watershed with the looming threat of permanent gold backwardation. Please take into account with your questions to Dr. Yellen in tomorrow's meeting that the members of the World Bank and IMF are bringing the reserves of gold in the global debt facility out of sequestration at this time and replacing the unconstitutional Federal Reserve notes, which have lost international reserve currency status. The military know about the accuracy of the power transition model. It was an aha moment for them when I reminded them that their soldiers were reading my social media along with everyone else, and their soldiers were reading the power transition model, and their soldiers knew that Japan and Japan's soldiers were also reading the power transition model. As a matter of fact, my DCTV broadcasts are now being translated into Japanese. So even if the Knights of Malta in the United States military can keep on firing the loyal servicemen and servicewomen because of that traitor, John Reimer, who is getting evicted from his house in the coming days under the commercial liens that the global debt facility holds. Vice Admiral Tim Giardina and Major General Michael Carey, who refused to nuke Charleston on March 7, 2013, are going to be reinstated and recognized as heroes as soon as the United States Constitution of 1789 has been restored. Here is my last tweet of March 5th to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The United States is in interregnum and not under secret martial law. Sufficient discerning patriotic people in the United States, including the enlisted men and women in the United States military, have been reading the true information available on the internet to take back our country. Together with the rest of the Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they are reclaiming the United States monetary gold reserves in the global debt facility. This was predicted with 90 to 95% accuracy by the power transition model that came to the World Bank from the United States Department of Defense in 2003. I discussed this model with Chuck Hagel in 2008 and have continued to remain in contact with the United States Department of Defense. Yes, that's the picture to show. General Joseph Dunford Jr. is not in charge of running this country through secret martial law. Right now, we are in interregnum. The military, who threatened me and then attacked me with their scalar technology, thought that I could be intimidated. The United States Armed Services, which includes the Joint Japan-United States Committee under the Status of Forces Agreement, is able to return to the rule of law and ignore the treasonous network of global control's lackeys. One of the things I'm going to be doing in the coming weeks is I'm going to be traveling to different places to try to help people understand where we actually are. It would be premature for me to go back into the World Bank when we're in the middle of an awakening. People need to recognize the difference between the actual situation, which is a lot brighter than they're being told. The actual situation is that there is an abundance of gold. We're not going to be releasing all of the gold. We're going to be releasing enough gold that's going to be equivalent to the gross domestic product of all of the countries. And it's not just the countries that belong to the World Bank. There's also North Korea. There's also Taiwan. All of these countries are going to be given gold. And it's not going to be the governments that's going to get the gold. It's going to go into the currencies that are in circulation. It's going to be a difficult transition because we have a lot to work out. A lot of the details remain to be worked out. One of the questions that I'm asked continuously is whether the mortgage debt is going to be forgiven. I've told you that country debt is going to be forgiven, but it's going to be up to the people in the individual countries to organize themselves, and this is not going to happen overnight because, as I've mentioned, all of the existing institutions have been controlled by the network of global corporate control. There have been gatekeepers who have been sitting at the top to make sure that people they're not in control of what's going on. We've seen studies about whether the United States Congress responds to public opinion, and it turns out that they absolutely do not. They respond to the network of global corporate control, and that's just about all that they respond to. We're going to have to, in the United States, figure out what to do about the presidential elections. There's been a lot of questions to me about whether this or that candidate is somebody who would be able to lead the United States. And the sad fact of the matter is that there is not a single candidate who has acknowledged that the United States gold reserves are not in the Federal Reserve Bank. There's not a single candidate who has acknowledged that the United States is in martial law. There's not a single candidate who has raised a question about the mysterious sudden death of the Supreme Court Justice Scalia. And for that very reason, it's going to be a very difficult decision for the American people whether they want to continue to recognize any of what's going on in these primaries. And all of the other countries have similar questions. Canadians are asking me what should happen in Canada. And we've been talking in previous episodes about the interregnum in the United Kingdom, because the Parliament is not recognizing the monetary gold that belongs to the United Kingdom. They're not recognizing the fact that their regent. There's a lot of questions about the throne, because it turns out that Queen Victoria had a son who was born before the great-grandfather of Queen Elizabeth II, which would make the descendant of that son, Manuel, who was in exile in Portugal. There's another contender for the throne. And the question, of course, is really whether the people in the United Kingdom have been well served by their royalty and whether they want to have a throne. These are questions that are not going to be decided at the World Bank or in the Global Debt Facility. And that's why it's very important for people to get together in small groups and to discuss these very serious matters and to figure out how to do a smooth transition. We don't want to drive the economy into a ditch. We don't want to do anything sudden. And the transition is going to be a very fundamental one. And the biggest, most fundamental transition is going to be an internal one, where people are going to have to recognize that they've been bamboozled and how they've allowed this to happen, because we've all played a role in that, and we're all going to play a role in the cleanup. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually, I think. I just had my furnace replaced at home, and that meant going for a night without heat. Transitions are not always comfortable, but at the end of the transition, in my case, I had a working heat, and I'm hoping in the case of this planet that we'll have a working international financial system. In today's segment, we've seen that the Knights of Malta in the United States military are not in charge because the Coalition for the Rule of Law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF are returning the world's international monetary gold reserves and a global currency reset. We're in transition. Today you've seen our muscle and hopefully understood that the reality is not what the network of global corporate control is telling you. Although we're in charge, we're going to let you reach out and tell the people around you what the reality is, so that our taking charge does not frighten people and they know what to expect. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudes.